The people of Hong Kong say that they have different values than the values that are espoused by the Chinese Communist Party. What they mean is, one of the things they mean is that they believe that human life is valuable, that every human being is unique and is a blessing for the rest of us. The Chinese Communist Party doesn't believe that. The Chinese Communist Party doesn't think of human beings as individuals at all.
Right.
It, in fact, refers to them as the masses. And any way the masses can serve the party, the masses should serve the party, including providing, say, hearts and livers and lungs and kidneys for senior Communist Party officials who may need a heart or a liver or a lung or a kidney. So I think the original idea behind organ transplants in China was the idea that we need that senior Communist Party leaders who have absolute command over all the resources in China, including all the human beings, wanted to seek a kind of immortality by organ transplant.
Right.
And so senior party officials were receiving blood transfusions back in the 1960s from young people, which actually does have a life-lengthening effect. And then they moved into transplants in the 1980s. And I think it was originally senior party officials who were the beneficiaries of the transplants. The prisoners who were executed were those who were, at that time, being given this horrible sentence of immediate execution with a 2-year suspended sentence. And that meant that they were on the chopping block at any given time. And when their tissue was a match to the tissue of a party leader who was in need of an organ, they would be executed by a single bullet to the back of their head, and their body would be transported to a medical van, and their heart or liver would be extracted immediately. So it was originally very limited, in my view. But then the Communist Party realized that it could make money by selling organs overseas to wealthy, not just Chinese, but wealthy transplant tourists from all over the world. And once that became evident, I think they got into the organ transplant business in a big way. And I think you've seen this in other areas as well. In the one-child policy, there were lots of little girls who were being abandoned after birth
Right.
by parents who wanted a son.
Right.
And they didn't have the heart to actually kill their newborn daughter, so they would leave her by the side of the road. And originally, all of those babies who were left by the side of the road died because no one wanted to adopt a newborn baby girl. Because if you did, that would fill your quota, and you couldn't go on to have a natural child of your own. If the baby happened to be taken to a state-run orphanage, they would die within weeks or a few days or weeks because they simply weren't fed or cared for. They were just left to die.
That's terrific.
But then the orphanages, the Bureau of Adoptions in Beijing realized they could make money by selling the baby girls. And so China got into the adoption business in a big way, again, driven by profit. The organ transplant business began the same way. They realized, the party authorities realized, that foreigners were willing to pay $150,000
Right.
for a
heart.
$180,000 for a liver. The price varies. And so they began developing transplant centers throughout the country. I think the People's Liberation Army were the leaders in this regard because, first of all, they had a ready source of prisoners,
Right.
through the police state that they helped to run, and they had army hospitals in existence. So as the traffic ramped up and more transplant tourists began to come to China, the advantage of coming to China was not just the cost, which was lower than the cost of getting an organ overseas. The advantage was that you could get a transplant almost immediately.
Right, unlike waiting several years, which is any civilized country.
In a civilized country, the way the process works is you have people who volunteer their organs. They sign an organ donor card, and if they happen to be killed and their organs are usable, their organs will then be used for someone who's maybe been on a waiting list for a liver or a kidney for years, Many people in the West, by the way, die on those waiting lists
Right.
because no tissue match appears permitting a transplant. In China, however, it doesn't work that way. It works the reverse. When someone orders a heart, and I use the word order deliberately, or a liver or a kidney, their tissue is typed, and immediately a match is found in the database maintained in China of potential donors. These aren't volunteer donors.
Right.
These are people who are in the Chinese prison system already. Because what happens when you go in a Chinese prison? Well, they just did this to the Uyghurs and the Kazakhs in Western Turkestan.
Right.
They called everybody in for what they called a medical examination. What did the medical examination consist of? Well, they took fingerprints, they did a retinal scan, they took a blood sample, they checked to see if their organs were healthy, and that was it. It wasn't a medical exam at all. It was an exam to see which one of these Uyghurs or Kazakhs might be a potential donor in the future for somebody who is willing to pay $150,000 for an organ. So I think they're now all at risk, too, the 1 to 2 million Uyghurs and Kazakhs who are in
So
concentration
it's basically,
camps.
it's creating a kind of a database where,
You create a
you can kill-
database,
yeah.
and I know that the Epoch Times has followed this story from the beginning. One of the striking things for me in the early days of your reporting on this was the story out of Israel, where a gentleman who wanted a heart transplant went to his cardiologist and said, "I'm going to China for a heart transplant on July 15th."
Yes.
And the cardiologist said, "How do you know there will be a heart available?" And the patient said, "Because they've already prearranged the heart. The only way you can do that is by making sure in advance you have a tissue match with a living person, and then when the transplant tourist with the money is on his way, you kill that living person and take his heart." So the timing of this is absolutely revealing. In my view, it's positive, proof positive, that they are killing people on demand for their organs in order to make a profit. And the profits of this business are huge. Remember, I mean, if you do 100,000 transplants a year and you're charging $100,000 per transplant, that's billions of dollars, $10 billion right there.
Right.
And I believe the actual money is even greater. So the doctors are profiting, the hospital directors are profiting, but the party and army officials are pocketing most of the money, I'm convinced. And they've also gone into ECMO in a big way. And a lot of people won't be familiar with ECMO. It's an acronym for extracorporeal membranous oxygenation.
Yeah.
And what it is an artificial heart and lung machine, and they connect it up to your a major vein in your body. They take the venous blood, the deoxygenated blood, out of your body. They pump it through, they filter it through a membrane which oxygenates it, and then they pump it back into your body as arterial blood. So it comes out as venous blood, sort of dark reddish blue,
deoxygenated blood.
and then it goes back in as bright red oxygenated blood. And what do they use this machine for? Well, they put people who are about to be sacrificed for their organs on an ECMO machine. And once they put them on the ECMO machine, guess what? They can take the heart out, and the other organs continue to be perfused with blood. They keep the people alive while they harvest all of the organs. And in the old days, 20 years ago, you might be able to get a kidney, but then the rest of the organs would be useless because more than 5 minutes had elapsed, and without 5 minutes without blood, the cells start dying. Or you could get a heart, but you couldn't harvest the liver and the lungs. Now, with this extracorporeal membranous oxygenation, this heart-lung machine, you can harvest all of the organs. And the worst part of it is this: they can actually put a balloon catheter in the carotid arteries going to your brain and block the blood flow to your brain while they keep the blood flowing to your organs. So they kill the brain at the same time that they keep blood flowing to the organs and can harvest them one by one. So they're able to make not just $150,000 off a single killing. They can make $750,000 off a killing because they're harvesting both kidneys, both lungs, the heart, the liver. Yeah.
It's hard to fathom and right.
And
hard,
it happens,
hard to
and it's
conceive.
happening every day in China. If they're executing tens of thousands of people a year for their organs, that means that every day in China, 10, 20, 30, 40 people are dying.
Because there's still no legitimate organ donation system, even though, you know, ostensibly they've said there's one that's been created. But there's some studies I was reading where that the data look like they're basically fake.
The Chinese have been telling us that the number of organ donors is increasing every year. And if you plot this over time, you see that it's a straight line, which doesn't make any sense statistically. So I think the numbers are obviously fabricated. Also, they said that they had 8,000 actual donors in 2018. Now, since they're doing between 60,000 and 100,000 transplants a year, that's far too few donors for all the transplants that are being done.
Right.
So I think on both counts, the numbers are unconvincing. And we know how the system works. I mean, a brutal regime that is willing to forcibly abort women at 9 months of pregnancy, killing their babies by lethal injection at birth, is not going to bat an eye at killing a political prisoner or a Christian or a Falun Gong practitioner for their organs. If there's a profit to be made at the other end, so much the better.
Steve, the big question, right, that jumps to my mind, and this is maybe